again. So, in this video, we are still reusing March footage. I talk about effective interview techniques, primarily from the perspective of the interviewer, not the interviewee. But as you go through the process of interviews, it can be really helpful to know what they are looking for. And when they ask you if that you have any questions, you can ask good questions. So without further ado, enjoy.
Hey guys, so I'm going to I was gonna try and break these slides up into two recordings, but I couldn't figure out a nice way to slice it that wasn't like 2/3, 1/3. Just some other quick bookkeeping announcements. So the university has, as far as I know, decided to finals during the exact same time they were supposed to be originally, which I believe means we do not get an extra week of class. Officially, they still have till Monday to make that decision according to their own plans. I will keep you posted and hope that we get some kind of news. There is a shutdown or a stay in place order till the end of April for all of Winston. So I'm going to keep recording to you from in my apartment and hopefully just do it as quickly as possible so you can get this class out of the way if you want. But yeah, so awesome. Oh, also, in case, so I talked with my department chair about whether we could do pass fail, given that this is like a requirement for some of the psych majors. You still can, and it can count for the major. I like explicitly checked with him, and yeah, so that's calculus pass fail decision has to be made by the 17th of April. I'm working on getting it so that you can be done by then, so I can give you a grade so you can make a pass fail decision that's educated. I'm working really hard on getting that done. Grades are going up. Some of them you already have. They look fantastic. But I will keep doing that. I'm bouncing between two classes and uploading your grades. So I'm working on it. Thank you for your patience. And these are just weird times. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk to you about effective interview techniques. Starting now. Oh yeah, like interviews are, really okay. There we go. Sorry, I missed my notes, which are not here. Great. So anyway, many fields rely on interviews to gather like information or make decisions for people. Obviously, like in psychology, we do this. A lot of tests or at least tests exist that are essentially structured interviews, but this occurs not just in clinical psych. This occurs in counseling psychology, forensic psychology, industrial organizational psychology. This occurs in business when you apply for jobs. You're being interviewed because they're trying to figure out if you're a good fit, if you're the best candidate for their position. We do this in business, in research, in law, for contractors, everywhere. Interviews are important. They're a good way to get like qualitative information. And yeah. So what's the goal? There's tons of goals. An interview is just like any other test. Goal is to gather data, make predictions. You can ascertain reliability from interviews as well as the validity of them. They can be administered to groups or individuals just like regular tests, and they can be structured or unstructured. You can do a lot with them. They're just another way to assign numbers. Well, not always numbers, but to assign values to traits or anything. So some interviews can be like standalone tests by themselves. So like employment interviews, psychiatric interviews, anytime you get your medical history taken, that's an interview. They're often used in conjunction or to augment other tests so that you have a more holistic perspective. In general, you want to have multiple you want to have like multiple assessments just so that you have hopefully a clearer picture. Even the thematic apperception test has an interview component. So goals of interviewing. So from the interviewer perspective, you want to establish rapport. So we already talked about how that's a pretty important aspect of test administration. You want to gather information efficiently. Yeah, well, so okay, these you don't have to do all of them, but like these are some of the aspects. So you want to gather information efficiently. So you don't want to have a really long meandering interview that's like days and days and days because that's not efficient. It can be used to form clinical impressions for psychiatric treatment and also just supplement testing information. Most of you have probably been asked, like, have you traveled outside the country? That is to supplement to make a decision on if you are at risk for coronavirus or if you're putting others at risk. And so like it's a screening technique to allow them to kind of decide whether to give a test to you or not. So interviews are fairly reciprocal. They're interactions between people. So it's natural for both parties to be affected. So like in criminal investigations, if so a suspect becomes more active and animated, this leads to the interrogator to become more active and vice versa. So this can inadvertently lead the suspect to be viewed as more suspiciously because the feedback. Okay, next slide. So other studies have shown that when actors responded with anger to highly trained interviewers, the interviewers reported becoming angry themselves. So it can affect what the interviewee does, so the person being interviewed, it can affect the interviewer. Usually when you've probably thought about interviewer views as, upperclassmen, you've thought about it from the interviewee's perspective because often most of the time you've been on the interviewee side rather than the interviewer side. So, but it's reciprocal. So this process of mutual influence during an interview is called social facilitation. What is social facilitation? We tend to act like those around us. So if an interviewer is tense, the interviewee will be tense. If the interviewer is relaxed, the interviewee will be relaxed. So this works with interviews as well as during crisis interventions or anytime people interact for an extended period of time. So we see this in social psych, developmental psych. It's not just a testing phenomenon or an interviewer it's a human phenomenon. I mean, not even, it's a living being phenomenon. Because if you act really stressed around, a pet, or they are gonna be receptive to that if though depending on the pet. Like a goldfish, probably not gonna, but like a cat, maybe. So yeah, more about social facilitation. So it has a strong behavioral influence both on the interviewer and interviewee. It is easy to see, this definitely can lead to a bias in an interview. So a good interviewer will be aware of this so that the power of social facilitation to remain calm and in control regardless of the interviewee's behavior. So to kind of minimize the bias that can occur from social facilitation or essentially the interaction between the interviewee's behaviors and their performance, if so that you can just you don't have some kind of minimized bias. The goal is to have a good interviewer stays calm and collected and doesn't react and is consistent. So kind of is uniform, which is the goal of any assessment, is to have a uniform kind of experience so you can compare across. So what are some principles for effective interviewing? So we want to have a proper attitude about it. So because there is interpersonal influence. So just recognizing that is there. The degree to which, just knowing that the degree to which one person can influence one another. So awareness is really key here. It's related to interpersonal attraction, so this degree to which you share a feeling of understanding, mutual respect, similarity. So you want to facilitate that. You want to establish rapport. You want to establish mutual respect. You want to have your test, have your interview be as effective as possible, and having an improper attitude makes it less effective. So probably the most important factor in patients' evaluations of interviews is their perception of the interviewer's feelings. So when an interviewer seems cold and defensive and uninterested, uninvolved, aloof, bored, the interview was labeled as poor. So perception of quality matters here, is impacted by how you behave. So when an interviewer seems warm, open, concerned, involved, committed, and interested, the interview was seen as good. It's positive. And so this maybe it doesn't impact the amount of the information you get directly, but it can, for patient intakes forms, like how you're treated when you enter a hospital, or like survey intake, that can color the rest of your interactions and even lead someone to not seek out medical care if they have a negative intake experience. So here's some things to not do. So you want to avoid responses that increase stress. So these include judgment statements. So these put interviewees on guard. So essentially, don't communicate approval or disapproval to the interviewee. Don't make them feel like they're being judged. Even if you are, even if you are judging them, because that's what an interview is, you don't want to increase their stress, because it makes the rest of the interview less useful and more biased. Yeah, so judgment statements, don't do those. Evaluative statements, these also communicate approval or disapproval, and they may inhibit self-disclosure if an interviewee feels during statements that they're being evaluated. So that's one reason why for certain things, a lot with sexual behavior, and anything that's politically, or not politically, but there's some controversy, often interviews are not the most effective technique, usually a computer or a phone interview or something, partially because it minimizes the risk of judgment or evaluation statements, so that because you want your interviewee to be comfortable, but sometimes you have to do interviews. So just pro tip, don't judge them, don't evaluate them in ways, or if you are, just don't do it in ways that make them feel. So you want to be really careful with how you use probing statements, so avoid why questions, because those can kind of signal a judgment. So these can cause defensive responses. So it may require a respondent to reveal more than they're comfortable revealing. And so at times, probing statements, they might be necessary, but they should be used with care. So in general, how is more effective than why. So how did you go about a challenge you had at work versus why did you go about it that way? That way they can kind of detail their behaviors rather than things that they could be judged for. But or at least they're less defensive about it. So here's some bad examples, why did you yell at him? So a better version would be, tell me more about what happened, or how did you happen to yell at him, or what led up to this situation, other than why. So that they have the option to kind of elaborate in ways that they're comfortable with. Or why did you say that? Okay, I did make the tone there a little, but instead you could do can you tell me what you mean? Or I'm not sure I understand, or how did you happen to say that? Third bad example, why can't you sleep? I realize that my tone here is a little But yeah, like, why can't you sleep? Instead, tell me more about your sleeping problem. Um, so just can you identify what keeps you from sleeping? Um, how is it that you're unable to sleep? Framing it as a how, just asking them to elaborate, just tell you more. It's fairly effective instead of like this why piece, which seems to make people defensive. So in general, responses to avoid in an interview, hostile statements. They're unnecessary if trying to gather information. They may be used in like a stress interview. So if you want to stress it out, so like police interrogations, for example, depositions, uh, um, from a legal standpoint, they might be effective, but don't do this if you don't have experience in the area. Like you these need to be really calculated. Don't give false reassurance. So don't give people reassurance when it's possibly unwarranted. And so like everything will be all right. You don't know that. I mean, you can again, this is context dependent, but you don't know if everything will be all right. So you can do what you can. But sometimes like it's with don't give people reassurance that's unwarranted because they might not need to be okay. So effective responses. So open-ended questions like those that can't be answered specifically are better than close-ended questions that can have a short answer specifically. So like that's yeah. So open-ended questions, they promote the flow of information. They provide a wider range of areas for interviewees and interviewers to explore. However, sometimes close-ended questions are necessary. So like yes/no questions are close-ended. Did you, you know, did you take the dog for a walk? Yes, no. Or it's about like yeah, like there's no real room to elaborate. Be like this dog walking is not a great example, but how was your walk with the dog today? Then either like the interviewee can go and talk about like how they didn't take the dog for a walk or the process they did. It gives them more options to like facilitate more talking to gather more information. So like if you need specific info or you're not getting a response, so if you don't get like anything from the open-ended question, so non-response also with kids, like depending on the kid, you're gonna have like sometimes it's just easier to get the like yes no, and there are some really cool structured interviews, the cross-cultural stuff I was talking about, which is in my office, has like really cool scripts and examples. Unfortunately, it's in my office. So yeah, anyway, let's keep going. So asking the right question. Oops, sorry, I got a guest. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Move this back. Ah! Okay. I want to at least keep you entertained. I got, yeah. Hello. Okay. Sorry. So interviewing skills require not only knowing what questions to ask, but how to ask them. So, like, for example, does your baby have any problem sleeping? Versus, what time does she usually go down for the evenings? Does she sleep throughout the night? How many times does she awaken during the evenings? How easily does she get back to sleep? When is she up in the day? When is she a morning and afternoon napper or just a once a day napper? How does she nap? How long does she nap for? Um, do you ever have to awaken her for meals? So being able to get specific information that essentially demonstrates that you have some knowledge of this and it's not just like, does your baby have problems? Because what do problems look like? Most people, at least for babies, don't, unless they've had one already, they don't know it's normal. Hey, sorry, we got a got some mischief. Yeah. So there are other ways to keep interactions flowing. So like transitional phrases like, okay, moving on, or things like that. Verbatim playback, so repeating back what you just heard. Paraphrasing and restatement can summarize. You can ask for clarity. You can empathize or demonstrate understanding. There are lots of different ways you can keep the conversation. So, example for transition phrases, I see, so sometimes they're not effective, so they're best to back up to something relevant from what the interviewee said. So, like verbatim playback, for example. So, you repeat the information that an interviewee just stated, reinforces the fact that you're listening. It's also useful for using the interviewee's words, so it connects you to the interviewee.
And that wraps for effective interview techniques. We've only got one module left to talk about some interview skills. Now, skills and techniques are different, I swear. And you will see that in the next module. So until then, thanks for hanging in there.